I'm Miranda, and I was 34 the day I stopped recognizing my own life. My husband, my ex-husband now Richard, sat across from me with his lawyer's perfect smile, watching the ink dry on the order that gave him full custody of our children. Given your lack of employment history and financial means, the court finds it in the children's best interest to remain with their father, Judge Morrison said. The words didn't sound real, like dialogue from a bad movie I couldn't turn off. My attorney squeezed my hand under the table. "Don't speak," she whispered, as if words could make things worse. But I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell that room full of strangers that I had worked every single day for 10 years raising children, managing a home, organizing fundraisers, helping Richard climb his corporate ladder while quietly erasing myself. Instead, I just sat there, frozen, smiling politely as my world was quietly handed to someone else. Richard adjusted his cufflinks like the verdict was a business deal. "Without my money, my connections, my protection, you'd be nobody again." He'd said those exact words to me a week earlier. And sitting there, powerless, I started to believe he might be right. When the gavel came down, I didn't cry. Not yet. But the silence, after the kind that fills your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat, that's when it hit me. I had no home, no husband, no children to tuck in that night. Just a half tank of gas, a suitcase, and a car that still had my name on the title because I'd bought it before the marriage. The last thing he couldn't take. Outside the courthouse, the air smelled like rain. Richard was already loading Emma and Tyler into his BMW. Emma, my sweet, sensitive 8-year-old, pressed her face to the window, tears sliding down her cheeks. I mouthed, "I love you." She mouthed something back, but before I could read her lips, Richard pulled away. That moment, the red taillights disappearing, was the sound of my heart breaking in two. I stood there for a long time, numb, watching other people walk past with coffee cups and briefcases like it was just another Tuesday. Then I remembered the only place left that belonged to me, the old country house my mother had left me 3 years ago. I hadn't even spent a night there. It had been too far, too run down, too depressing, Richard used to say. Now it was all I had. The drive took 2 hours through winding mountain roads. By the time I reached the property, daylight was fading into that soft blue that makes everything look like a memory. The house stood crooked and forgotten at the edge of a gravel drive, peeling white paint, broken shutters, wild ivy clawing at the porch. This was supposed to be my fresh start. Instead, it looked like a tomb for every version of myself I'd buried. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with dust. The furniture was still covered in white sheets, like ghosts frozen mid-motion. I flipped the light switch, nothing. The power was dead, or maybe the bulbs had just given up too. When the water finally ran, it came out brown at first, like even the house was bleeding out old memories. I stood at the sink, watching it clear, whispering to no one. "Okay, you can do this. You have to." That first night, I didn't sleep in a bed. I curled up on the old couch under one of Mom's handmade quilts, the fabric soft and faded with the scent of lavender. Somewhere outside, wind pressed against the windows, and for the first time in years, there was silence. No arguments, no schedules, no voices, reminding me what I wasn't. Just silence. And in that silence, a terrifying thought. I didn't know who I was without him. But somewhere beneath the grief, under all that exhaustion and fear, something small and stubborn flickered the tiniest spark of anger, maybe, or maybe courage. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment my story stopped being about what I'd lost and started being about what I was going to rebuild. Morning came softly, spilling through the lace curtains in a pale gold that made the dust in the air look like slow-moving snow. For a moment, I forgot where I was. I reached instinctively for the left side of the bed, the place where Richard used to sleep, and found only cold air and silence. Then the memories hit like a wave. The courtroom, the signatures, Emma's tear-streaked face. I sat up, heart pounding, and whispered to no one, "You're on your own now." The house was quiet except for the groaning of old pipes. I wrapped myself in one of Mom's faded cardigans hanging from the hallway hook, the one that still smelled faintly of rosemary and laundry soap, and walked through each room like a stranger. Every corner held echoes of her. Stacked books, half-burned candles, a chipped teapot still sitting on the stove. She'd been gone 3 years, but somehow, It felt like she'd been waiting for me. The kitchen was my first battlefield. I opened the refrigerator and laughed at the absurdity of finding nothing but expired jam and a jar of pickles that looked older than my marriage. By noon, I'd wiped every surface, scrubbed every cabinet, and thrown open all the windows until the chill air stung my fingers. It wasn't just cleaning. It was a kind of penance for every time I'd chosen Richard's life over my own. That afternoon, I drove into the small town nearby to buy supplies. The clerk at the hardware store looked up from his newspaper. "You must be Ellen Foster's daughter," he said, squinting. "She used to talk about you all the time. Smart one," she'd say. "Got herself a degree in numbers or something." I smiled awkwardly. "Economics." "Right, she was proud of you. You know," he said. "Said you'd do big things." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Yeah," I murmured. "Big things." On the drive back, I pulled over just before the gravel road that led to the farmhouse. For a moment, I just stared at the mountains. 10 years of marriage had passed without a single decision that was truly mine. I hadn't realized how much of my life had been built around asking for permission. The realization was both terrifying and freeing. That evening, I lit one of Mom's old candles, lavender and vanilla, and ate canned soup straight from the pot. The flickering light made the kitchen look softer, kinder. Somewhere between exhaustion and quiet, I began to think about everything Richard had said in court. "She's unemployable. She hasn't worked in years." He wasn't wrong, but he also wasn't right. I still had my degree, my brain, and a memory of what it felt like to be capable. I just needed to remember how. 3 days later, the doorbell startled me. Through the smudged glass, I saw a familiar face. Mrs. Henderson, my mother's old neighbor, holding a casserole dish covered in foil. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, smiling with the kind of warmth that makes you feel human again. "Your mama used to love my tuna noodle casserole." The smell nearly made me cry. We sat at Mom's small round table, sunlight pooling between us. "She was proud of you, you know," Mrs. Henderson said softly. "Always talking about how clever you were with numbers. Said you got that from her side." "I haven't used my degree in 10 years, I admitted. Richard said I was more valuable at home." Her eyes narrowed, sharp with the wisdom of someone who's seen too much. "Your mother never liked that boy. Said he was the type to take credit for other people's sunshine." I laughed, though it came out more like a sob. She was right. Mrs. Henderson reached across the table and patted my hand. "Maybe it's time to take your sunshine back." That night, I sat by the window long after she left, looking at the moonlight spilling across the overgrown yard. Somewhere inside me, a decision was forming, quiet but solid. I couldn't fix everything yet, but I could start small. The next morning, I woke with a plan. Clean every inch of this house until it felt like mine. Then find a job, any job, that would let me stand on my own. The furnace wheezed to life after several false starts and one near heart attack. I watched my breath fog in the cold air and whispered, "Come on, you old thing, work with me." When it finally rumbled into action, I laughed out loud, the sound echoing through empty rooms. It wasn't victory, not really, but it was the first time in months I'd made something work with my own 2 hands. Outside, snow clouds gathered over the mountain ridge, heavy and low. Inside, the house no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like possibility, rough, imperfect, but alive. And somewhere between the hum of the furnace and the glow of candlelight, I realized something profound. Maybe losing everything wasn't the end. Maybe it was the only way I could ever start over. It's strange how quickly survival becomes routine. Within a week, the farmhouse stopped feeling like a graveyard and started feeling like a challenge I might actually conquer. I woke each morning to the creak of the porch, brewed instant coffee in Mom's chipped blue mug, and made lists. Always lists, because lists felt like control. Fix the faucet, replace the locks, find a job. It was that last one that terrified me most. I hadn't filled out a job application in more than 10 years. My last professional title had been financial analyst, but in the years since, I'd become Mrs. Hartwell, wife, hostess, mother, everything except myself. Now, sitting at the old kitchen table with my laptop, the cursor blinked back at me like it was judging me for every lost year. "Still," I typed. By noon, I'd submitted 6 applications, most to positions I was technically overqualified for, though my resume said otherwise. 10 years out of the workforce might as well have been a century. That afternoon, I drove into town again, this time wearing my one decent blazer. The employment office was a narrow building between a diner and a thrift shop, smelling faintly of coffee and paper dust. The clerk, Carol, looked up with polite sympathy. "Been a while since you worked?" "10 years, I admitted. She nodded, like she'd heard it 1,000 times. "Happens more than you think. There's a part-time position open at Mountain View Community Bank. Small hours, small pay, but it's something." Something was exactly what I needed. I drove 3 blocks to the bank, heart pounding. The glass doors reflected a version of me I hadn't seen in years, anxious but standing tall. Inside, a woman about my age greeted me from behind the counter. "Patricia Walsh, branch manager. What can I help you with?" "I heard you might be hiring," I said, handing her my resume. She scanned it, eyebrows lifting. "Economics degree, financial planning background, impressive. But 10 years out of the field is a long time." "I know," I said quickly, "but I haven't forgotten what I know. I just need someone to give me a chance." For a moment, she studied me. I could tell she'd already decided to say no. I'd seen that look before, the one Richard's colleagues used when they realized I was just a housewife. So I kept talking. "You need someone patient with clients, good with numbers, dependable. I can be that person. I just need to prove it." Something in my voice must have reached her. Patricia's eyes softened. "Tell me about your approach to personal finance." And for 20 minutes, I came alive. I spoke about budgeting, compound interest, market behavior, words that hadn't crossed my lips in a decade, but rolled out like music I still remembered. When I finished, she smiled faintly. "All right, Mrs. Hartwell. 3 days a week. Trial basis. $15 an hour." It wasn't much, but it was mine. That night, I sat on the porch steps wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars blink through the cold. The world felt bigger again, not less scary, just more open. I whispered into the night, "Thank you, Mom, for the house, for the chance." The next morning, I drove to the bank early, gripping my thermos like a lifeline. My first customer was a young couple trying to understand mortgage terms. Their eyes darted nervously across the paperwork. I smiled, remembering how intimidating money used to feel before I'd studied it. "Let's take this one step at a time," I said, drawing diagrams on a notepad. "Debt-to-income ratio just means—" As I spoke, something inside me unclenched. I wasn't pretending anymore. I was good at this. When the husband said, "You made this make sense," I felt a spark I hadn't felt in years, pride. Not the kind Richard used to offer in condescending doses, but real, earned pride. At lunch, Patricia stopped by my desk. "You were right," she said simply. "You do learn fast. Keep it up." Her words stayed with me all day. By the time I drove home, the sun was sinking behind the mountains, turning the sky a deep coral that looked almost unreal. I parked, stepped out, and saw it again, that odd section of siding on the porch wall. The boards looked newer than the rest, just slightly misaligned. I ran my fingers over the wood, feeling the difference. Strange. I made a mental note to check it later. Inside, I made dinner pasta with whatever I had left in the pantry and sat by the fireplace Mom had once used to read by. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was beginning. And somewhere, deep in the bones of that old house, something seemed to hum quietly, like it was waiting for me to discover it. That night, I couldn't stop staring at that strange patch of siding near the porch. It looked slightly off, too clean, too deliberate, like someone had tried to hide a scar beneath fresh paint. Every creak of the old farmhouse felt alive, whispering secrets just out of reach. By morning, curiosity had replaced exhaustion. I brewed coffee, tied my hair back, and stepped outside with a flashlight and a hammer. The mountain air bit at my skin, but my pulse was steady. For the first time since the divorce, I felt something close to determination. Not the fragile kind that comes with desperation, but the deep, steady kind that comes when you know you're standing on your own. I tapped the wood gently. Hollow. The boards were newer than the rest of the house, fastened with shiny screws instead of old nails. Someone had gone out of their way to make this patch blend in. I pried at the corner until the first plank came loose with a soft groan. Behind it, a second layer of wood, older, warped, framed a narrow cavity. Inside, something metallic caught the light. I pulled out a small metal box, about the size of a shoebox, wrapped carefully in plastic. My hands trembled as I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table. Dust coated the lid, but the lock gleamed like it had been cleaned recently. A combination dial. 4 numbers. My first instinct was to laugh. Of course, I muttered. Of course, Mom would make this a puzzle. I tried her birthday. Nothing. Then mine. Still nothing. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the box. My coffee had gone cold, but my pulse hadn't. What would she have hidden here? She'd been a librarian, for God's sake, not some secret agent. But something about the neat handwriting on old mail scattered across her desk flashed in my mind. Her habit of writing dates in the corner of every letter, always in careful, looping numbers. Then I remembered something small but vivid. When I was a kid, she'd call the 23rd her lucky day. It was the day she and Dad got married, the day she'd bought this very house decades ago. I turned the dial. 80823. Click. The sound was soft, almost polite, but it changed everything. Inside, there were no stacks of cash, no gold bars, no guns, just a thick envelope with my name on it, written in Mom's perfect cursive. Underneath it, a few small jewelry boxes and a folder of official-looking documents. But the envelope felt heavy, like it was holding more than paper. I carried it to the living room and sat on the couch, the same spot where I'd cried myself to sleep my first night here. I tore it open, and a letter slipped out, along with several folded sheets. The first line made me forget to breathe. My dearest Miranda, if you're reading this, it means life has forced you back home. Don't be ashamed of that. I built this house to be a refuge for you just in case the world ever became too cruel. My throat tightened. Her handwriting curved across the page like she was still alive, speaking through ink. There are things you never knew about your father and me. We weren't just a librarian and a teacher. Before you were born, we built something together, something I've spent years protecting for you. We wanted you to have choices, no matter what life took from you. I froze, the words sinking in slowly. Protecting something? My parents had always lived simply. No vacations, no fancy cars. I'd thought their modest life was born of necessity. But what if it had been deliberate? The next page was filled with numbers, investment accounts, property deeds, bank names I didn't recognize. At the bottom, she'd written, "If you're lost, go to the County National Bank, safety deposit box #247, use the enclosed key. Everything you'll need is there." My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the letter. Beneath it, I found a tiny gold key attached to a faded business card with the bank's address written in ink that had started to blur with time. I opened one of the jewelry boxes. Inside lay a delicate pearl necklace I'd never seen her wear, and beneath it, an insurance policy with my name as beneficiary. I read the number twice, just to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. $3.7 million. The world tilted. I pressed the papers against my chest and whispered, "Mom, what did you do?" Outside, the mountain wind howled softly through the trees. The house, once a symbol of everything I'd lost, now pulsed with life like it had been waiting for me to uncover this exact secret. I walked to the window, clutching the letter, and watched snow begin to fall, light and quiet. Somewhere out there, Richard still believed I was broken, unemployed, powerless, defeated. But my mother had known better. She'd seen the fall coming before I ever stumbled. And now, she'd handed me the one thing no court, no husband, no man could ever take away, a second chance. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the letter again. Mom's looping handwriting, her calm confidence echoing through every line. I kept whispering her words to myself like a prayer. If you're lost, go to the bank. Everything you'll need is there. By morning, the decision was already made. I brewed a cup of coffee, dressed in my best blazer, and drove through the winding roads into the county seat. The air was cold and sharp, the kind that makes you feel awake down to your bones. The County National Bank was quiet that morning, marble floors, brass railings polished to a shine, the kind of place where you can almost smell history. When I handed over Mom's documents and the small gold key, the teller glanced at me curiously before disappearing behind a heavy door. Minutes later, a manager appeared and guided me to a private room. The walls were lined with numbered drawers, each one holding someone's secrets. I held my breath as he placed safety deposit box #247 on the table in front of me. When I lifted the lid, it wasn't just money I found, it was a map of my mother's mind. Inside were folders labeled with meticulous care: investments, properties, trust deeds, insurance, future planning, each one neatly organized with typed summaries, handwritten notes in the margins, even little sticky tabs marking urgent or review. The first document I opened stopped my heart cold. It was a portfolio summary from over 20 years ago: stock certificates, bonds, mutual funds, all in her name. Many of the companies were household names now, but 2 decades earlier, they would have been obscure. She hadn't just invested, she'd predicted. Company after company, she'd chosen small firms that later grew into corporate giants, and she'd done it on a school librarian's salary. Another folder revealed property deeds: 4 rental homes in the nearby valley, a small office building in town, and, unbelievably, mineral rights on hundreds of acres of mountain land. Every one of them quietly generating income. I sat there, frozen. All this time, I'd believed Richard was the financial genius of our family. Turns out, the real strategist had been my mother. At the bottom of the box, another note in her handwriting. "Miranda, your father and I built this quietly so you would never be trapped. You have the knowledge to manage it, to grow it, to make it your own. It's time you remember who you are." I read that line over and over until my vision blurred. For 10 years, I'd let someone else tell me I wasn't capable, that I was too emotional for finance, too fragile for business, too inexperienced for independence. Now, sitting in that quiet bank room surrounded by evidence of my mother's brilliance, I realized the truth: Richard hadn't chosen me because I was weak. He'd chosen me because, deep down, he'd sensed I wasn't. On the drive home, snowflakes swirled against the windshield. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. I was curious. Back at the farmhouse, I spread everything out on the kitchen table. The papers covered every inch: spreadsheets, ledgers, even hand-drawn flowcharts Mom had made to track market performance. Her planning was so precise it felt like I was sitting across from her again. I laughed through tears. "You were planning this the whole time, weren't you?" The house didn't answer, but the radiator hissed like a soft yes. That night, I made my first call to a financial advisor, a man named Thomas Parker, who had once worked with Mom. His voice was calm, professional. "Your mother was remarkable," he said after reviewing the documents I sent. "She understood long-term strategy better than many of my wealthiest clients. She didn't just save money, she built something." Something inside me straightened. Then it's time I build something too. Over the next few days, I barely left the kitchen table. I organized everything into folders, labeled each investment, calculated values. The total took my breath away: over $2 million in assets, not including property income. That night, I stood at the window, looking out over the snow-covered fields. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what I could build. Richard's words from the courthouse echoed in my head. "Without me, you'd be nobody." I smiled. "Watch me." The next morning, I called the local contractor who'd once done repairs for my mother. "I want to make this house livable again," I said. "But keep the old bones. She built it to last." As the line clicked and arrangements were made, I looked around at the house, the peeling paint, the worn floors, the cracks in the plaster, and saw not ruin, but foundation. My mother had given me more than money. She'd given me strategy, stability, and the one thing Richard could never own: a legacy. And this time, I wasn't just inheriting it. I was claiming it. When people talk about rebuilding their lives, they never tell you how quiet it is at first. No applause, no cinematic montage, just long days of learning how to move through fear, one small decision at a time. For me, it started with a spreadsheet. Every night after work at the bank, I'd come home, make tea, and sit at Mom's kitchen table surrounded by her old files and my new ones. The house creaked softly around me as I organized portfolios, calculated returns, and plotted ways to stretch every dollar. Somewhere between exhaustion and obsession, I began to feel something unfamiliar, a sense of control. Patricia noticed the change before I did. One morning at the bank, she stopped by my desk as I explained a loan application to a nervous farmer. "You ever think about getting certified as a financial advisor?" she asked. Her words froze me. "Me? You've got a knack for this, Miranda. You make people feel like they can actually understand money. That's rare." That night, I searched online until midnight, reading about the certification process. It was intense 6 months of coursework, exams, and case studies, but something about it lit a spark in me I hadn't felt since college. I signed up before fear could talk me out of it. By the time winter melted into spring, my life had rhythm again. I worked 3 days a week at the bank, studied every evening, and spent weekends repairing the house room by room. Every nail, every painted wall felt like an act of defiance. Then, one Tuesday morning, Patricia called me into her office. "You've impressed a lot of clients," she said. "We'd like to expand your hours." It wasn't just a promotion, it was validation. Afterward, I parked my car outside the bank, gripping the steering wheel with shaking hands. I'd done it. Not as Richard's wife, not as someone's daughter, but as me. That night, I celebrated alone with takeout noodles and a glass of cheap wine. The silence didn't bother me anymore. It felt earned, but my joy was cut short when I checked my phone and saw a message from the custody monitor. "Reminder: supervised visit with Emma and Tyler this Friday at 3 p.m. Just reading it made my stomach knot. The visits took place at a neutral center, with a court-appointed observer sitting in the corner, pen poised like a judge. Every hug, every word, every glance recorded. When I walked in that Friday, Emma's eyes lit up first. "Mom!" she shouted, running into my arms. Tyler followed more slowly, clutching his toy dinosaur. His small hand slipped into mine, hesitant, but there. We sat at a table covered in coloring books. I helped Emma braid her hair as Tyler colored quietly beside us. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Then she said, "Daddy says you can't take care of us because you don't have a house." The words stabbed harder than any court ruling ever could. I forced a smile. "Well, Daddy's information might be a little old," I said gently. "I do have a house now, Grandma's old one. And I'm working again, helping people with their money, just like I used to." Emma looked at me curiously, as if trying to match that version of me to the mom she remembered. "Can we see it someday?" "Soon," I whispered. "Very soon." After they left, I sat in the parking lot for a long time, staring at my hands. They still smelled faintly of Emma's shampoo. I'd thought getting a job and a home would be enough, but now I understood. Richard wasn't just trying to win, he was trying to erase me. That night, I called Sarah, my old college roommate, now an attorney. "Miranda, it's been forever," she said, her voice warm and sharp, the kind of tone that could cut through any nonsense. Within 10 minutes, I'd told her everything. The divorce, the custody ruling, the inheritance, the quiet rebuilding. She listened without interrupting, then said, "Okay, first, I'm proud of you. Second, you need to be strategic." She laid out the plan like a general preparing for war. "Courts don't reverse custody lightly. You'll need to prove significant improvement, financial stability, steady employment, safe housing, emotional well-being. Document everything. And Miranda, don't reveal the full inheritance yet. Let him underestimate you." Her advice settled deep in my bones. That night, I opened a new folder on my computer labeled Operation Rebuild. Inside, I created subfolders: career, home, finances, custody evidence. Every photo of my renovated kitchen, every payslip, every certification quiz proof, not for Richard, not even for the court, for me. Weeks turned into months. The house came back to life, new wiring, fresh paint, curtains that fluttered in spring breezes. I filled it with secondhand furniture and framed photos of Emma and Tyler on the mantel. And every night, before bed, I'd read Mom's letter again, her final line etched into my mind. It's time to prove him wrong. I didn't just want to win custody. I wanted to rebuild a version of myself so complete, so grounded, that no one would ever be able to take my power away again. Because this time, I wasn't fighting to survive Richard's world. I was building my own. A full year had passed since the day I'd walked out of that courthouse in tears. But when I returned, everything about me was different. That morning, I buttoned up my navy suit, the one I'd saved for this moment, and looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't trembling anymore. Her eyes were steady. Her hair was pulled back, her shoulders squared. She looked like someone who'd learned how to build storms, not hide from them. I kissed the small framed photo of Emma and Tyler on my dresser. "Today's for you," I whispered. Sarah met me outside the courthouse. She looked sharp and fearless, clutching her notes. "You ready?" "As I'll ever be," I said. But the truth was, I'd never been more ready for anything in my life. Inside, the air smelled the same as it had a year ago: polished wood, old paper, faint tension. But this time, I wasn't the woman begging to be heard. I was the woman they'd have to listen to. Richard sat across the aisle, flanked by his two attorneys in tailored suits. His expression was unreadable, but I caught a flicker of something in his eyes, maybe surprise, maybe unease. I sat taller. When the judge entered, I felt my pulse steady, not race. "Mrs. Hartwell," Judge Morrison said, glancing down at the paperwork. "I see you've filed for a modification of the custody agreement. You claim significant change in circumstances. Please present your evidence." Sarah stood first, her voice calm but cutting. "Your Honor, my client has not only achieved financial stability, but professional success and emotional recovery far beyond the court's expectations." She moved like a conductor, each piece of evidence timed perfectly. First came the proof of my employment, pay slips, promotions, testimonials from Patricia and clients who'd worked with me. Then my certification documents, proving I was now a licensed financial advisor with a growing client base. Then came the part I'd been waiting for. Photographs of my renovated home, bright rooms, separate bedrooms for the children, a fully functional workspace. Finally, Sarah revealed my investment portfolio statements, printed neatly in color. "Your Honor," she said, "Mrs. Hartwell's investment returns over the past year place her in the top percentile of professional money managers." I glanced at Richard. His face went pale. His lawyer immediately requested a recess, dragging him into the hallway. Through the glass door, I could see Richard gesturing wildly. His composure was cracking, the mask slipping. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him almost. When court resumed, his attorney tried to spin the narrative. "Your Honor, we question the legitimacy of these assets. Mrs. Hartwell had no financial resources at the time of the divorce. This sudden wealth seems suspicious." Sarah didn't flinch. She produced Mom's death certificate, the inheritance documents, and tax filings. "These funds are from a verified inheritance, properly transferred and fully reported," she said coolly. "There's nothing suspicious about a mother preparing for her daughter's future." The judge nodded slowly. "Proceed." Richard's lawyer changed tactics. "Even if her financial status has improved, money doesn't equate to parenting ability. Mr. Hartwell has provided stability for the children for over a year." I stood before Sarah could stop me. "Your Honor, may I speak?" The judge hesitated, then nodded. I took a breath, my voice steady but full. "A year ago, I walked out of this courtroom believing everything my husband said about me, that I was helpless, incapable, unworthy of raising my own children. But he was wrong. Losing everything forced me to find out who I really am. I built a career, a home, and a life that no one else controls. I'm not asking for custody because I inherited money. I'm asking because I've proven I can provide love, safety, and stability. The kind of stability that isn't measured in dollars, but in presence." The room went silent except for the scratching of the court reporter's pen. Then the bailiff opened the door, and Ruth, the court-appointed supervisor, entered to testify. She adjusted her glasses, smiling faintly when she saw me. "Over the past year, I've observed a remarkable transformation," she began. "Mrs. Hartwell demonstrates consistent emotional stability, genuine affection, and strong engagement with her children's needs. Both Emma and Tyler express happiness during their visits and talk about wanting to spend more time with her." Richard's attorney tried to interrupt, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. When Ruth stepped down, Sarah delivered her closing argument with quiet power. "My client hasn't just rebuilt her life. She's modeled resilience, compassion, and responsibility, the exact qualities children need from a parent. The judge leaned back, hands folded. I'll take this under advisement. You'll be notified of my decision within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. It might as well have been 2 years. Outside the courthouse, the cold November wind whipped through the parking lot. Richard caught up with me as I unlocked my car. You think this changes anything? He said, his voice shaking. Money doesn't make you a better mother. I turned, calm but sharp. No, but believing in yourself does. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. Maybe he didn't. That night, I drove home in silence, the headlights carving through the fog. When I reached the farmhouse, I left my coat on the chair and stood by the window. The snow had started again, soft and quiet, covering the world in white. Somewhere out there, my mother's plan was still unfolding. And deep down, I already knew how this story would end. 2 weeks later, the call finally came. I was at my desk, helping a client refinance his farm loan, when my cell phone buzzed. This is Judge Morrison's office, the voice said. My hands trembled as I gripped the receiver. The judge would like you to appear in his chambers Monday morning at 9 o'clock to discuss your custody modification request. I thanked the clerk, hung up, and sat frozen. Sarah's voice echoed in my mind. He wouldn't call you in person if it were a denial. Still, the weekend felt endless. I scrubbed the floors twice, reorganized the pantry, even baked bread just to keep my hands busy. Every time I walked past the kids' empty bedrooms, I straightened the sheets, fluffed the pillows, whispered, soon. Monday came with snow dusting the mountains and a nervous calm in my chest. I drove to the courthouse in silence, the heater humming softly. When I stepped into Judge Morrison's chambers, Richard and his lawyer were already there. He looked tired, pale, and angry like someone who'd spent 2 weeks fighting ghosts. The judge adjusted his glasses and began, Mrs. Hartwell, you've demonstrated remarkable progress, personal, professional, and emotional. Your financial stability and home environment exceed the court's standards for primary custody. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. Then came the words I'd been waiting for. The court grants your request for custody modification. Relief hit like a tidal wave. My vision blurred. I barely heard the rest. Something about a gradual transition period, alternating weekends, smooth adjustment. All I could think was, I'm bringing my children home. Outside the courthouse, Richard tried to corner me. His voice was tight, venom hidden under civility. You're disrupting their lives out of pride. Money and success don't make you a good mother. I looked him straight in the eye. You're right. But love does. And I never stopped having that even when you tried to take everything else. He flinched, and for once, he had no clever reply. The first weekend, Emma and Tyler stayed with me. The house felt alive again. Emma ran from room to room, gasping, It's so pretty, Mom. Tyler trailed behind, dragging his dinosaur, asking if he could keep it in his new room forever. Saturday night, I tucked them in. Emma whispered, Mommy, are we really staying here now? I smiled through tears. Yes, sweetheart, you're home. For a while, everything was quiet, almost too peaceful, but I should have known better. Men like Richard don't lose gracefully. It started with a phone call from Patricia one morning at the bank. Miranda, I just got something strange, she said carefully. A man called, claiming to be investigating your finances. Asked about your salary, your clients, even whether the bank knew about your inheritance. My stomach dropped. What did you tell him? Nothing, of course. But he also contacted several of your clients. Of course, Richard couldn't attack me in court anymore, so he'd chosen a new battlefield, my reputation. That evening, I called Sarah. This is harassment, she said firmly. If we can connect it to him, we'll file sanctions. But I knew Richard, he'd never leave fingerprints. He'd hire investigators, whisper to people who whispered to others, spreading poison just out of reach. For days, I felt the tension closing in clients, asking cautious questions, phone calls going quiet when I answered. Then came the breaking point. Miranda, dear, said Mrs. Patterson, one of my elderly clients, her voice shaking on the phone. Someone came to my house claiming to be from the state tax department, said you were under investigation, and needed records of all your work for me. That was it. Richard had crossed a line he couldn't hide behind anymore. Sarah filed a formal complaint with local authorities, and I decided to fight back in my own way, not through lawyers or threats, but with something Richard had never understood: strategy. Mom had always told me, "Power isn't loud, sweetheart, it's precise." The next morning, I called a meeting with Patricia, my accountant David, and two local business owners who'd become my allies, Janet from the real estate agency and Martin from the hardware store. I told them everything. Janet slammed her hand on the table. "We've all seen how hard you've worked, Miranda. If he's targeting you, he's targeting our whole community." That meeting changed everything. We formed an informal coalition, a network of local professionals who agreed to redirect suspicious inquiries to Patricia, who would log every call and forward it to Sarah. At the same time, they'd openly vouch for me to their own clients. It wasn't revenge. It was containment, the quiet kind that kills rumors before they breathe. But deep down, I knew Richard wouldn't stop until he was cornered. So I decided to remind him of something he'd forgotten. I knew where his skeletons were buried. One night, I pulled out a stack of old financial files from our marriage donations, expense reports, tax records. The same meticulousness that had once made me a perfect housewife now made me dangerous. By morning, I found what I needed: charitable contributions to a local municipal fund that wasn't a charity at all, but a political action committee connected to city contracts. He hadn't done anything outright illegal, but it was ugly, the kind of ugly that ruins reputations and friendships. I scheduled a meeting at a quiet cafe in town, the same one where he'd once humiliated me during our divorce. When he arrived, he wore that familiar smirk, the one that used to make me shrink. Not anymore. "I think we should talk," I said calmly, sliding a folder across the table. He opened it, and I watched the color drain from his face. The donation records, the PAC filings, the contract awards, all neatly highlighted. "I imagine your business partners and city council friends wouldn't appreciate seeing this printed in the local paper," I said evenly. He snapped the folder shut. "You wouldn't." I held his gaze. "Try me." Silence. Then he exhaled, the fight deflating out of him. "What do you want?" "I want peace," I said simply. "No more harassment. No more investigators. You stay out of my business and let our children grow up without hearing their parents tear each other apart. In return, I forget this folder exists." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, "You've changed." "Yes," I said. "That was the point." He left without another word. I sat there for a while, staring at my reflection in the cafe window, the same place I'd once cried into my coffee. Now, that reflection smiled back. Because for the first time in my life, I realized something important. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just refuses to flinch. A year later, the farmhouse no longer felt like a refuge for the broken. It had become a home for the living. The wild ivy that once clung to the porch was trimmed back, the windows gleamed, and the rooms echoed not with loneliness, but with laughter. Emma's drawings covered the refrigerator, Tyler's toy cars lined the hall, and the smell of cinnamon rolls filled the kitchen every Sunday morning. The sound of their voices running through the house was the proof of every battle I had fought and won. Some nights, when the kids were asleep, I'd sit by the fire with a cup of tea and look through the box of old letters and documents that started it all. Mom's handwriting still brought tears to my eyes, steady, graceful, certain. Her words had guided me through every step, like a lighthouse calling me home. "You'll know what to do when the time comes, Miranda." And I had. After the confrontation at the cafe, Richard disappeared quietly from my life. No more investigators, no phone calls, no threats. He remarried 6 months later to a woman I'd never met and moved to another state for work. He saw the kids during holidays, sent polite emails, and never mentioned the past. Peace, I'd learned, didn't always mean forgiveness. Sometimes it just meant the war was finally over. Professionally, things had bloomed faster than I ever imagined. My financial advisory business, Foster and Hartwell Consulting, named in honor of Mom, had grown from a few local clients to over 100. I'd hired 2 assistants and rented an office downtown, bright, airy, full of plants and light. My story spread quietly, through word of mouth. Clients told others how I'd started from nothing, rebuilt, and turned loss into strategy. Some came for financial advice. Others came just to listen, to find hope in the ashes of their own lives. Then, one afternoon, I received an email from the Harvard Women's Business Review. They wanted to feature me in an article about women who rebuilt their lives after financial and personal collapse. I stared at the screen for a long moment, smiling. Mom would have loved that. The day the article went live, I read the first paragraph out loud to Emma and Tyler. A small-town mother-turned-financial strategist shares how resilience, intelligence, and quiet persistence can rebuild more than wealth. They can rebuild the soul. Emma clapped. "That's you, Mom." I laughed. "Yeah, I guess it is." Later that night, after tucking them in, I walked out to the porch. The sky was deep violet, stars scattered like salt across black velvet. The same mountains that had once made me feel trapped now felt like a promise. I thought of the girl who had once driven up that winding road with nothing but a half tank of gas and a broken heart. I wanted to tell her she'd make it, that one day she'd look back and realize the loss wasn't punishment. It was preparation. A soft wind brushed against my face, carrying the faint scent of lavender, Mom's favorite. For a moment, I could almost hear her voice again. "You did it, sweetheart. You found your way." Tears came, but they were warm this time. Not grief, gratitude. Inside, Emma stirred and mumbled in her sleep. "Mom, love you." I smiled, whispered, "Love you too, baby," and closed the door gently. Standing there, surrounded by everything I had rebuilt, my home, my career, my peace, I realized something deeper than victory. The real inheritance Mom left me wasn't the money or the properties. It was the belief that even when the world takes everything, you still have yourself, and that's where true power begins. I walked to the window, looked at the reflection of the woman I'd become, and whispered to the quiet night, "You were right, Mom. The legacy lives through me." Then I turned off the light, knowing that for the first time in years, tomorrow didn't scare me. It inspired me.